người thầy hay khá.
What?
You had a special prize for the two of you? No?
All
Aircraft?
still together when we start.
Yeah.
是明天还在那个人民会的那个大厅里吧？还是在大会厅里面？啊？开始录完，在你那个在当地的那个。 还有一些对对对。对啊，对啊。那就跟那个什么乱七八糟的。对吧？不是，它这也是一个现象，就是这个它是在全球，都认为在全球传播的，就是它是在全球传播范围是很广。包括流行病的是不是全球是区域性？现在你比如埃博拉，实际上是区域性，对吧？这个它是就是某个像可可爱的，对吧？
但是对，看那个WHO的官网，它就是判断这里历史很多的。
说有这个，但是在没有被这个。
但是它判断历史这个
啊有。
天花都有。
一直在说这个。
不是，还没行，还没有。
但是官网上确实判断那个多少号，人家历史的信息，
对吧？
你看一下它这个 WHO 官网。
Yeah, exactly. Down 800 points.
And walk like that, you snap your back. Daddy, where can we find on the WHS site the infectious health workers, the so where you having the rollout, you know, the daily infections.
They shifted them.
Du vendredi, et la première semaine, ils ont fait 2 samedis. Tu vas venir pour le Canada. Il y a 3 matchs et c'était plutôt l'équipe d'Italie.
Cannabis. Non, je sais pas quoi ça. Et avec deux, mais si j'ai l'ami, ouais, non, il est pas le dit. Non, il voulait arrêter. Chaque fois, il y a quoi, il tient le son pour la soliste. C'est mieux, quoi. Il faut bien
Oh, when you show up, it's time. It's not ready. Then you're always in the close inner circle.
Hey, there's a rumour going we're going to get the sit reps at midday. We're going to get the sit reps at midday from tomorrow.
Is that true? Bonjour. How are you? Well deserved. Well deserved. Very good, very good. That's what we need, solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. Exactly. Window of opportunity. That'll win. Are they getting close?
Pascal Lamy was using that phrase during the Doha round.
So her out.
Ja, de goede. Ja. Looks good.
How's the family, all right?
Good, thanks. Yeah, no issues. My father-in-law had to go into a morning because he's like a minister. He's in their city, so they had an emergency meeting yesterday. Check in on what's going on. The godfather of the boys is a GP, so they're taking new action.
You see that?
3%.
Dallas down to 800 points.
Oui, non, j'ai envoyé des photos.
So there's his GP in the family in Italy, and he's received all the advice from authorities as to what to do.
Here in Geneva.
No, in Italy, in these affected regions. And as I asked him, so what do you think? Is it better to be prepared, over-prepared than under-prepared? And he said, I'm sure over-prepared all the time.
What's that?
He said, go over-prepared.
Yeah.
People want to be assured that their safety is being thought of.
Totally. That's the question.
And taking these measures now helps build again, think of solidarity. Communities like that, where people are looking looking to rally around something.
Totally.
Gives a bit of hope.
Exactly. Well, you know, the question is where do you draw the line between or if over-preparedness makes
Over-prepared, hopefully, make it easy.
you would think, right?
Because giving you information, preparing the community, and follow the strict ones.
Exactly. Ça mérite au moins un café, si ce n'est pas une bière. Check-les, t'as qu'à faire. Normalement, elles sont pleines. Son front qui brille, qui perle de sueur. Bravo, c'est un bon camarade.
C'était 70 000 personnes. Quotidiennement.
It depends, though. I mean, it depends how strong countries are. You see the rapidity of how countries like developed but then our biggest fear is around weaker countries.
Hey guys.
Good afternoon, everyone, and sorry for this delay. It's a very busy day here for us in Geneva, and that will make us have this press conference very shorter than usual. Journalists online, it's clicking raise hand to ask questions, those dialing in *9. Today we have Dr. Tedros, Dr. Silly Brian, Dr. Mike Ryan, that I don't really need to introduce specifically. Today we will start with the questions from journalists online. This is because we need to set up room at another part of the building where we'll have a Secretary General of the United Nations visiting WHO. I will give the floor to Dr. Tedros immediately for his opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Tariq. And good afternoon, everyone. Let me start, as always, with the latest numbers. As of 6 a.m. Geneva time this morning, China has reported a total of 77,362 cases of COVID-19 to WHO, including 2,618 deaths. In the past 24 hours, China has reported 416 new confirmed cases and 150 deaths. We're encouraged by the continued decline in cases in China. Earlier today, the WHO China Joint Mission concluded its visit and delivered its report. As you know, the team has traveled to several different provinces, including Wuhan. The team has made a range of findings about the transmissibility of the virus, the severity of the disease, and the impact of the measures taken. They found that the epidemic peaked and plateaued between the 23rd of January and the 2nd of February, and has been declining steadily since then. They have found that there has been no significant change in the DNA of the virus. They found that the fatality rate is between 2% and 4% in Wuhan and 0.7% outside Wuhan. They found that for people with mild disease, recovery time is about 2 weeks, while people with severe or critical disease recover within 3 to 6 weeks. The team also estimates that the measures taken in China have averted a significant number of cases. The report contains a wealth of other information and highlights questions for which we still don't have answers, and includes 22 recommendations. Dr. Bruce Aylward will give more details tomorrow on behalf of the joint team. But the key message that should give all countries hope, courage, and confidence is that this virus can be contained. Indeed, there are many countries that have done exactly that. Outside China, there are now 2,074 cases in 28 countries and 23 deaths. The sudden increase of cases in Italy, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the Republic of Korea are deeply concerning. There is a lot of speculation about whether this increase means that this epidemic has now become a pandemic. We understand why people ask that question. WHO, as you know, has already declared a public health emergency of international concern. Our highest level of alarm when there were less than 100 cases outside China and 8 cases of human-to-human transmission. Our decision about whether to use the word pandemic to describe an epidemic is based on an ongoing assessment of the geographical spread of the virus, the severity of disease it causes, and the impact it has on the whole society. For the moment, we are not witnessing the uncontained global spread of this virus, and we are not witnessing large-scale severe disease or death. Does this virus have pandemic potential? Absolutely, it has. Are we there yet? From our assessment, not yet. So, how should we describe the current situation? What we see are epidemics in different parts of the world, affecting countries in different ways and requiring a tailored response. The sudden increase in new cases is certainly very concerning. I have spoken consistently about the need for facts, not fear. Using the word pandemic now does not fit the facts, but it may certainly cause fear. This is not the time to focus on what word we use. That will not prevent a single infection today or save a single life today. This is a time for all countries, communities, families, and individuals to focus on preparing. We do not live in a binary black and white world. It's not either or. We must focus on containment while doing everything we can to prepare for a potential pandemic. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. Every country must make its own risk assessment for its own context. WHO is also continuing to do its own risk assessment and is monitoring the evolution of the epidemic around the clock. But there are at least 3 priorities. First, all countries must prioritize protecting health workers. Second, we must engage communities to protect people who are most at risk of severe disease, particularly the elderly and people with underlying health conditions. And third, we must protect countries that are the most vulnerable by doing our utmost to contain epidemics in countries with the capacity to do it. In the past few days, I have held meetings with the foreign ministers of France, Germany, Indonesia, Cuba, the Republic of Korea, and I want to thank them for agreeing to support the response. I also wish to thank the European Commission for its contribution of 232 million euros, which demonstrates the kind of global solidarity that gives me hope. France, Germany and Sweden have also announced additional contributions. This is a shared threat. We can only face it together, and we can only overcome it together. When we act together, countries, regional and global health organizations, the media, the private sector, and people everywhere, our collective strength is formidable. Alone, we lose. Together, we win. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros. Before we start with questions, some of you may know Chinese health authorities have organized press conference at the end of the International Expert Team mission, where Dr. Bruce Aylward and the national counterparts have talked in more details about their findings. As we speak now, we are sending you audio file from this press briefing, so you can hear more about that. And with that, we will start with questions from our colleagues online. I'm calling on Politico. If you can hear us and maybe introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
If you can just speak a little bit louder, but we can hear you.
Yes, hi, this is Ashley from Politico. I just wanted to know, are the contributions to the urgent funding appeal, the majority is still in pledge stage. When is this funding expected to be received by the WHO?
Thank you for that.
Yes, the most of the funding is currently in pledge stage, but we do have mechanisms in-house for firm pledges that we can begin to spend against those pledges immediately, and we are making arrangements with Raoul Thomas and Jane Ellison to do just that. So we should be able to start expending funds against firm pledges in the coming days.
Thank you very much. Just to remind everyone, very short questions, as we don't have much time. We are now calling on, as I said, we will take a few questions from online first, because our colleague Chris has to go. Helen Bransfeld, very fast. Helen, short question.
Hi, thank you very much for taking my question. I tried to listen to the audio from Beijing today, and I was unclear at times whether Dr. Aylward was recommending that other countries take the measures that China is taking. Is WHO suggesting that when the virus arrives in a new location, that countries should effectively try the lockdown approach that China has used?
As I said in my statement, Bruce will be giving a press statement tomorrow in Geneva. So I think it would be better to attend that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we will have a Bruce Aylward tomorrow. But as I said, you can already listen. For those who have not been listening, you can listen what he has said as we are sending audio file. Let's go to CNN China, if we can hear from China.
Hello. Hello.
Okay, we don't have CNN China. Let's then go quickly to the room here. Stefan, please.
Yes, Stefan Bissal, the Times newspaper. Two questions. First, about Iran, the surge of new cases. Apparently, there is a very high mortality rate if we compare to the number of cases and the number of deaths. So if you could elaborate on that. And second question is about Switzerland. Do you recommend any specific measures as far as the exposure to Italy is concerned? Thank you. Switzerland and Italy and the exposure, obviously they have specific measure on the border. Thank you.
With regard to Iran, again, a little like was originally the case in China, we need to be very careful in the first wave of infections in any newly affected country, because we may only be detecting severe cases and the deaths will be overrepresented in that. We also need to be cognizant that the virus may have been there for longer than we had previously suspected. We do know, again, and each and every country is a different dynamic. You saw in Japan with the Sea Princess. You see with Singapore when they had a cluster at a conference where there was exportation from that conference. You've seen in the case of Iran religious gatherings. So sometimes when you see an acceleration of cases and a spread from that, it doesn't necessarily represent the natural transmission dynamics of the virus. It's very much driven by the context of a gathering and then people moving after. So the natural transmission dynamics are such that if you look in most cases, for example, even in China, are in family clusters. Most secondary cases occur in families. About 1 in 10 contacts become subsequently confirmed as cases, and that's been driving the epidemic. There are very then particular circumstances. So again, we need to understand the exact dynamics of what has happened in Iran. But clearly there have been gatherings for religious festivals and then people coming and then moving afterwards. So I think it's going to take another few days. We have a team arriving in Iran tomorrow. And our regional director will actually be there tomorrow as well, and the team arriving in Italy as we speak, and we're reaching out to all affected countries to ensure that they have the necessary technical assistance to understand the specific context and the transmission dynamics they're observing. But again, I caution everybody, please don't extrapolate from one individual country experience. Each situation is different. Oh, sorry. No, I think there are, again, the European Union and Switzerland and other European countries have been working closely together to maintain their open borders and to manage this risk collectively. Again, I think I've said it in numerous press conferences, there is no zero risk in this. This is about good risk management. It's about good communication between states. It's about management and early detection of cases and their appropriate isolation and treatment. It's not about shutting borders. It's about coherent, coordinated public health action by a number of member states who share borders in order to effectively manage the public health consequences of any importation of COVID-19.
Thank you very much. Let's try one more time to call a few journalists online and then we will get back to the room. So Jacqueline from CNN. Jacqueline, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks for taking my call. This is Jacqueline Howard from CNN. My question is just to follow up on the comments Dr. Tedros made about pandemic. Thank you for clarifying questions around the word pandemic. My follow-up to that is, at what point, as we monitor this outbreak, at what point could we call this a pandemic? And for any outbreak, what criteria does it have to reach to be determined a pandemic?
Somebody may wish to come in on this. Pandemic comes, I think, from the Greek pandemos, which means everybody. Demos meaning the population, pan meaning everyone. So pandemos is a concept where there's a belief that the whole world's population would likely be exposed to this infection and potentially a proportion of them fall sick, and we've seen it in influenza. It occurs in different waves. So pandemics of influenza can be sometimes called a lot earlier because we know we've had previous pandemics, and we know with influenza that when there's highly efficient community transmission, as we see with seasonal flu, that the disease does spread around the world, and it has proven that time and time again. So it's much easier to say a pandemic will occur in an influenza situation. What we don't understand yet in COVID-19 are the absolute transmission dynamics. And look what's happened in China. We've seen a significant drop in cases, huge pressure placed on the virus, and a sequential decrease in the number of cases. That goes against the logic of pandemic. Yet we see, in contrast to that, an acceleration of cases in places like Korea, and therefore we're still in the balance. It's very important that, and the Director General has said this time and time again, now is the time to prepare. So we're in a phase of preparedness for a potential pandemic. That doesn't stop anyone doing what they need to do. We've had enough countries now import disease. It is time to prepare. It is time to do everything you would do in preparing for a pandemic. But in declaring something a pandemic, it is too early. We're still trying to avoid that reality, we're still trying to avoid that eventuality, and countries are having success in doing that. So let's focus on what we can do and what we need to do, which is prepare. When we mean prepare to detect cases, prepare to treat cases, prepared to follow contacts, prepared to put in place adequate containment measures. It's not 100 different measures. There are probably 5 or 6 key interventions, and the Director General outlined them in his speech, and Sylvie may wish to comment on this as well.
Yes, thanks a lot. And I think whatever is the situation, as Mike highlighted, what is really important to understand is that the situation will be different in different contexts. And so that's why local and national risk assessment is so important, because this is how you can really tailor the intervention to the context. And even in one given country, the situation may be different in different provinces, for instance. And so that's why it's so important now to get prepared and to grab these nuances, and so that we can put in place effective interventions. And one of the comments also is that each disease has a different trigger. And what we know for flu, because flu has been hitting the humanity with different pandemics, 3 in the past century and 1 is in this century. So we have more experience of this kind of disease, and it's easier to define triggers for when we are in pre-alert and when we are really in a full pandemic mode. But for this disease, it's a very new disease, and we are still learning about it. So we do is a very careful monitoring, 24/7, and working closely together to be on top of it at any moment.
Thank you very much. We will take one more question from online. Banjo Kaur from India, down there. Miss Banjo, can you hear us?
Hi, my question is to Dr. Tedros. Dr. Tedros, you were meeting the officials of African CDC the other day, and you were taking a stock of the preparedness. Can we have some sense as to how many laboratories in different countries of Africa are prepared to do testing of the samples, and how many countries do have such a facility?
Yeah, thank you.
Also, if you could just give a sense about how much are these countries prepared to launch a quarantine if required at any point in time?
How much are they prepared? What? The second one.
Second one.
Okay. So I will take the first one. As you know, at the start of this outbreak, there was only one country that could do the testing. Now we have 41 countries.